The internet is cracked, the show that asks the question, can we coexist with our creation?
Hi, I'm Seth Camillo.
And I am Carolina Risberg, and we are the Internet is Cracked by Addicts for Addicts.
And today we are extraordinarily lucky to have Dr. Shane Greenstein, the Martin Marshall Professor of Business Administration at the Harvard Business School, joining us today. And we couldn't be more excited to speak with you.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
We have discussed, some of the topics we wanted to cover, and we were going to start with Web 2.0. And I know you wrote a book that sort of encompassed, it wasn't limited to Web 2.0, but it encompassed Web 2.0. And I think my first question, and probably what a lot of our viewers are going to wonder, is what is Web 2.0? And are there sort of benchmarks you can say this is when it began and this is when we entered Web 3.0? Because we're officially in Web 3.0, if I'm understand things correctly. So if you could maybe describe what it is exactly and when it started.
Yeah, I mean, Web 1.0 is the series of protocols that Tim Berners-Lee made available on the internet. He started about 1989, made them available in 1991 as open source. The Web Consortium is started in 1994. Web 2.0 is a label from Bill O'Reilly, who, of the O'Reilly Publishing Company. And that emerges in the middle part of the first decade after the millennium, when he observed from many a conversation that tools had been added to the standard web protocols to make it more engaging and to give it more reach. And I would add some of those tools also enabled what we're doing now, which was streaming, which is roughly about the same time also. And then there, I would add, sort of perhaps more broadly, the kind of app kits that came out of app development kits that came out of Apple and then out of the Android system in the latter part of the decade also became sort of a part of the standard tool for reaching users and getting more engagement. And again, those tools have a long history, so exactly dating those when they were invented is a little bit hard.
Maybe a bit of an unfair question, but
I would say that that group of things is what Web 2.0 is. When did Web 3.0 start? Gosh, I don't even know how to answer that question. That's again, a kind of one of these vague things about decentralized development. That in the last decade, again, emerged as a movement online, part religious movement, part practical
it
movement.
seems like there might be some overlap in the two, perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, I think of Web 2.0 mostly as starting after the millennium and having its biggest heyday for about the next dozen years. And we're still seeing some wake from that, if I would say so. But yeah, that's the way I think of it. And then there's a whole bunch of things in Web 2.0 that are radical departures from anything we've ever seen before. Streaming in particular.
Yes.
Right, Netflix. There's no business like Netflix ever. A huge amount of back end changes to make that viable. That's a massive departure from anything that came before it. So if you think about Web 2.0 as, again, having these two different, really very far apart economic phenomenon, something that's very basic, incremental, and something that's a substantial investment, typically at the server side. That's another way to think about Web 2.0.
Huh.
And like Netflix is my standard example of a non-incremental thing, but there were
Uh-huh.
plenty of others.
How do we get from here to there in the sense that the technology that this stuff is put on top of the Netflix was not
Mhm.
the intention of the people who were
Oh, yeah.
creating.
Oh, yeah.
So Web 2.0 sort of seems like I was out in San Francisco in 1999 working for a place called rentals.com doing Web 2.0 stuff. Incremental. We thought we were changing the world. We were funded by SoftBank and Sequoia. So we had real people believed in us, even though it was, in retrospect, very incremental, like you were saying. You know, finding an apartment in a certain town, it was not like now I can watch a movie on my TV at will. It was a very small movements forward. But I think it's very interesting if you could speak about that a little bit, about how Web 2.0 is almost force of will, or on top of a technology on top of a technology that was not necessarily meant to be what it has become.
So one of the, rentals.com and a lot of other platforms are matching platforms. Matching platforms was not something that Tim Berners-Lee had anticipated. That's for sure true. And I think I've
Mhm.
interviewed most of the people who invented TCP/IP, and they surely didn't anticipate it either. Um,
Mm.
and matching platforms are a great example of Web 2.0, in the sense that they're providing a service that's trying to engage the user and trying to spread that widely. Um, the fascinating thing about some of those matching platforms is a whole series of incremental things together adds up to an architecture that can, after a long period of time, generate non-incremental changes. And of course, the standing example of that is Amazon,
Mm.
which in 1999 really wasn't doing anything that was going to change the world, but they had aspirations to. And after many years of incremental change, look where we are today.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I mean, the matching platform is really quite amazing on one level,
Well, we
and
thought so.
Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, and at the same time, it fails miserably at other levels.
Mm.
I could say, you could say the same thing about Google. It's absolutely fascinating that you can search for anything at all,
Yeah.
and the fact that it gets it right 20% of the time on the top line is amazing. If you think about it, however, it's terrible. It you have to go
Mm.
down a little bit. It's actually not very good yet either. The standing example we use for those two sides, think about any electronic commerce platform you like. It typically doesn't give you the answer you want on the first try. And yet, on the other hand, it's gotten so much better at being able to match. And yet, there's even today, here we are, 2025. There's
Mm.
still much further to go. The standing example I like to give is to go to any clothing website and ask for a black dress for a goth party, not for a funeral, not for a ball, right? For that specific use case.
Huh.
Will you get one right away? Of course not. You'll have to
No.
be able to, yeah. You have to go back and forth. It's still kind of the ideal that we can't realize that very precise request. Not yet, anyway. Maybe we'll get there, but not yet.
Mm. So what do you think have done for the industry?
If you think about it, if you think about the whole macroeconomy, if I can be an economist for a minute,
Go for
Yeah. Yes. Go.
it's my day
You're
job.
it. Go for it.
Please.
Uh, retail commerce and advertising supported media. Okay, that'll get you some part of GDP. That's
Mm.
great. Healthcare sector is still bigger than that, and
Mm.
construction's bigger than that. And those are two sectors where the internet hasn't really had huge productivity consequences yet. We'd love to see information technology make healthcare more productive, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So just to give you an example, now there are promises in the near future, maybe that it will, but just when you think at that broad level, um, Web 2.0 was still somewhat narrow. Don't get me wrong; it changed everybody's life. If you look
Yeah.
at surfing data, how people spend their time, um, dating patterns,
Yeah.
the use of leisure time. There are massive changes in those things. That isn't necessarily going to show up in a productivity statistic in GDP. Um, uh, uh, so again, if I'm being an economist, it's kind of always being a downer, but it's like that's on the other hand, there's some massive changes. My favorite statistic: 40% of marriages today have come out of the online dating world.
Is
Yes.
it that
That's
much?
remarkable.
Yeah, it
Um,
is. I don't know if
that-
that's a good thing, but I guess, I mean, as long as, it's just different. But yeah.
is it better or worse than relying on your grandparents and their friends to make a match? I don't know. I mean,
Yeah,
right?
that's true. That's true.
Sure, but it is a massive change in society. Again, I'm not sure I'd call it a productive change, but it is a massive change. Also,
Yeah.
you see things, the number of hours people spend online. It's massive change in the way leisure time is allocated.
It's
Again,
true.
doesn't show up in productivity quite the same way. So that's
That's an extraordinarily interesting point that you're making, that the world can change in very basic ways, but that it doesn't necessarily change utility, productivity, GDP, whatever you want to call it, uh, in
But
discernible ways necessarily. For instance, I mean, Caroline and I were talking about, sort of redistribution of wealth. There are a lot more billionaires, and a lot of the
yeah.
billionaires come out of Web 2.0,
that's right.
and
Yeah.
and there may be the same amount of money. There just may be the distribution curve may look different than it did.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about that. I mean, that development is coincident with one other thing, which is the rather large redistribution of the location of manufacturing of commonly consumed items
Mhm.
um, from North America to Asia, which reduced their price also, but also changed a lot of the jobs for a lot of people. So that happens at about the same time we have um, Web 2.0 deploying. Um, and so you have those two things sort of at the macro level
Oh.
going on at the same time. It's very hard to distinguish between the two. I actually think the redistribution of the location of production of manufactured goods probably had a bigger effect on wealth distribution,
Okay.
Mhm.
because it affected employment so much in
Mm.
so many parts of the Midwest, especially. Um, but having said that, the visible gains from Web 2.0, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It did concentrate um, returns in firms who had the right. That what we're observing is firms who had the right kind of domain knowledge and technical knowledge, and were able to combine those two in ways to make um, massive revenue generating machines,
Yeah.
mostly around advertising. Um, so a
Mm.
very specific part of the economy. So Facebook or
Mm.
Meta, if you will, uh, that's an extraordinarily profitable firm. Google uh, in the 2000s and the 2010s, especially among the most profitable firms ever in the history of modern capitalism. Um, Apple,
Mm.
after the iPhone, again, really one of the most extraordinarily profitable firms ever. Actually, Netflix is not an especially profitable.
Not yet. Amazon
Not
wasn't
yet. That's what
profitable
I've
for a
heard.
long
They're
time either.
very low.
The-
Amazon is also Amazon in its retail side is generally not an especially profitable firm. On in the AWS side, oh my gosh, what a cash machine! But
Why don't you, could you say, explain what AWS is in case there's.
Amazon Web Services. So that took the cloud and a version of the cloud that Amazon was using internally, and then added a friendly front end to it to make it available to non-Amazon users. And it has two really defining characteristics from my perspective. One is it translates the efficiency of large-scale storage into something that's available to the typical user without much friction. So the price per unit of storage and unit of compute, oh my God, is just incredibly low. And then the second thing that AWS tends to be very good at doing is adding a set of front-end tools that make things a little bit more accessible and friendly. Now, they're certainly not the only one now to have done that, but they pioneered it at a scale that we had never seen before. And I always say, from an economist standpoint, from a historian of technology standpoint, it's really an odd thing they did. It's like General Motors saying in 1952, "Hi, we're making cars, but we're going to rent out our assembly
Yeah.
to everybody else. So you can make a car too, and you can make one if that's all you want."
Yeah.
That's the equivalent of what AWS has done.
And it won't cost, and the marginal cost of building that one will be it will be the same as if you built a million, right? You get,
basically built a lot. Yes, that's
you
right.
get the advantage of scale, even though you only are making one.
Yes, exactly right. Which is just very rare to have observed historically in the AWS is quite something. Anyway, the point of raising it is it's also very profitable.
Yeah.
So I do think that there is a sort of society in Silicon Valley, a sort of philosophical mindset that is good at creating wealth, you know?
Yeah, or creating a community where some of them are going to get wealthy.
Right.
Well,
Right.
yeah, and many of them as a community are quite adventurous. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in that also. So
Yes, you went to
yes,
you went to
yeah,
Berkeley, right? And
and
went
I
through.
grew up on the East Bay, and and certainly have many friends in the industry. Yeah, it is a particular attitude. Um, One of the things that came from just make an amendment to that. One of the things that came from writing the book about the origins of the internet and its commercialization, and then now writing about Web 2.0, we could get into AI,
Yeah.
Which we will do in a second here.
yeah, is that it's not unique to the Bay Area. It's perhaps bigger in the Bay Area, but you also find similar clusters of, again, if I could say it at a general level, domain knowledge and technical knowledge and their combination in other areas of the country. So Seattle, of course, is one such area that doesn't surprise anybody. New York and Los Angeles, by the way, have plenty of this also. And actually Boston less than you would expect given the per capita PhD number of PhDs in the Boston area. Yeah. Instead, you tend to find it in the biotech area in the Boston area. Not as much in the IT and data intensive areas as used to be the case. You also find plenty of it in DC. Washington, DC. And so you do find these clusters. And then there are these medium-sized cities that tend to also have them, like Austin, and Boulder,
Okay.
and a few other places like that. So it's, even though I agree the Bay Area gets an outsized role, you do find other places in the country also get, tend to be these clusters of wealth generation for some firms. Usually there's an anchor firm that's behind it, or
Mm.
two that's behind it. And then the notable thing is it's almost always affiliated with quite a lot of education,
Yeah.
combined with entrepreneurship, and some domain knowledge. You can't just be a geek. You have to actually know something about the industry that you're working in.
Yeah.
That's what you tend to see. Yeah, and that is an interesting pattern, and not, say, it's hard to find a historical precedent for it. Where you had that combination on this scale. Yeah, obviously there have been precedent for highly educated entrepreneurs in the past, so that per se is not unusual. It's just the scale of it this time is pretty unusual.
So the whole new business model have changed, right? Like like how we buy shoes, let's say, or
Yes.
like with, I mean, and what's going to happen with the mom and pop stores, or like I'm guilty for it. I can order something on Amazon and it comes, you know, same day sometimes. And I could have going down the hardware store and got that screw. Like it's just,
So
what do you think
so
is going to happen economically for all of us? Like,
so
can we actually have?
you know, that's a great question. Let's refine it a little bit.
Yeah.
I think the puzzling piece, um, is as the puzzling piece is sort of the following: when the internet deploys, somebody in New York can buy cheese from somebody in Wisconsin, and somebody in
Mm-hmm.
Wisconsin can buy shoes from somebody in New York. And why is it? It's right that both were
Yep.
possible.
Yeah.
So we could have gotten in principle the dispersion of wealth all over the country. Yet
Right.
we didn't tend to get that.
Mm.
And so the way to think about it is, this was called the death of distance forecast. I mean, that forecast
Mm.
was made in the latter part of the 90s. And the death of distance could have meant one of two things. It could have meant, um, I can buy it from anywhere, or it could have meant, as a producer, I can locate anywhere. As it's turned out,
Mm.
the first one is true. You can buy it from anywhere. Producers, however, turned out to be very picky. Producers have not chosen to locate anywhere. Producers have chosen to locate in places where they can hire uh, uh, technical talent to help them sell anywhere. And that turns out not to be equally distributed across the country.
All right.
That tends to favor some places and not others. That's the part that I have to admit, I didn't see that coming. I didn't expect that at all.
Because that's
Um,
sort of the economist's dream, is the ability to trade with anyone, anywhere, without barriers to entry.
Mm.
And that's what it seemed like the web was on the way to doing. I mean, it was always called the democratization, and it's
and
kind of been the
it's a
opposite.
well, and there was democratization in the sense that you and I can both HTML code in HTML. It's great. That's the part that was in everybody's face in the late 90s, and you thought, hey, my goodness, this is amazing. Everybody has access to this. This isn't
Yeah.
too hard. Um, and then, of course, the part we didn't foresee, uh, is what would be rare, because what's rare and in demand turns out to have a lot of value. There's an old economic theory about that. A guy named Adam Smith invented it.
Yeah.
Uh,
Why don't
and
you, can you identify, before we move on to AI, what is the rarity that is needed for this brew to create profitable companies, and why it's the profits are not shared equally among the nation and the world?
Yeah. So among them, let's start with things like a network effect. That is a location where you can anticipate others you're going to communicate with are going to show up, and they anticipate they can communicate with you. So there are a rare number of those. Um, um, Facebook for a time, now Instagram, I would argue, is one such place.
Mm,
Twitter for a time
mm.
was one such place. Very interesting question is whether it will persist.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, uh, how badly can you manage it, and how biased can you manage it and still retain the network effect? It turns out, gosh, that network effect is really strong, as it has turned out. Um, that's
Yeah.
another such example. So network effects. We could give other examples. Another one is reliably satisfy your attention. Is the way I sort of think of it. So Netflix is a version of that.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So an attention magnet. Um, those turn out to be rare. YouTube has another one of those. You can reliably go there and it will grab your attention.
Yeah.
Apparently TikTok has one of those, so I've been told by everybody younger than me. Um, um, uh, so, uh, uh, um, I cannot claim to be an expert on that particular
Mm-mm.
one.
Well, we used to
Um,
call it when first we were always like first mover advantage, which is a way of saying network effect. If you have 4.2 billion people like Facebook has, even if you have this exact same software that Facebook has, you can't replace those 4.2 billion users, of which 3.2 are daily users.
Yeah, if you can retain them, that's so
Right.
you're absolutely right. But retaining them is a challenge. You can't neglect them either. I think one of the interesting examples would be Airbnb. Um,
Mm.
so a third model is a matching platform. So that's right. That's a version of a network effect, but the network effect is buyer and seller coming together. So it's not a communication platform. It's a I'm coming. Two different kinds of parties come to the same place to meet. Um, Airbnb is a fascinating example of that because it wasn't first. Uh,
Mm. Mm.
but what they were extraordinarily good at doing was displaying the information that the buyer wanted to know, and so they
Oh.
designed a very, very good interface that then attracted and built up. Another one in this category is Booking.com. Um, Booking.com was not the first travel website um, by any stretch.
Mm.
They are now the largest, and they got that way through relentless incremental improvement. They are an extraordinary firm. They do so much A/B testing. It's kind of crazy, actually. They do
Yeah.
so much A/B testing, but they've incrementally improved bit by bit over time. I mean, Amazon at the end of the day is a matching platform. A huge amount of their business today is third-party supply and
Yeah.
third-party
Yeah.
fulfillment, and they've become this reliable matching platform for third-party supply. Um, as a retail outlet. Again, fascinating. That's not particularly profitable. The most profitable part of that business right now is the advertising side. Um,
Oh,
all
okay.
those little ads they show you when you show up.
Mm-hmm.
And then AWS is an old-fashioned scale economy play. That's doing one thing extraordinarily well, and sharing those scale economies with lots and lots of people. Um,
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually pretty old economics. So, apply, it's old wine in a new bottle, but
Is there such a thing as old economics or just new businesses? I don't know, but yeah,
and then yeah,
So
new
I
ways
have
of
a
doing.
question. What lessons can the current digital platform learn from the 2.0, you think?
that's a great question. The importance of hiring talented people with different kinds of knowledge, not just one type. Also, the long run. Gosh, a lot of things that aren't profitable for a very short period of time end up making it over a long term, and
Oh,
that's another thing. Um, let's looking recently at the history of Spotify.
yeah.
Uh, they came close to crashing and burning 3 or 4 times,
Oh, okay.
in the first half dozen years that they existed, before they were able to achieve the kind of scale they've now got. And even now, they're not an especially profitable firm. They're still um, a lot of the value they create goes to copyright holders. Um, and
Mm,
if you want to just say it, it goes to the labels. Um, so
okay.
it
Does the
that
artist gets any? Did the artist get any money from it?
oh my goodness, we could spend hours on that question.
Oh, okay.
Um, uh, uh, um, Artists at the top do that. That's the
Oh,
one thing we can say for sure. Taylor Swift does okay. I
yeah.
suspect Taylor Swift would have done fine under any system.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Uh, and there are some artists at the bottom who would not have otherwise gotten
Mm,
anything, who are getting something now. I think many people believe it's flattened out returns in the middle, a bit, and the reason it's hard is because the system we used to have with recorded music, um, was going to go away one way or the other, and
yeah.
so we have to compare what we see in Spotify with something else. I think it's incorrect to compare it with what we had in 1984. Um,
Mm, mm,
Okay,
that
that's a really
system,
good point. That's a really good
yeah.
yeah,
point.
that
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, it was a great system in 1984.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got something different today, and so I don't know what to compare it against. That's why I always find this a hard question.
So why don't we switch gears and start talking about artificial intelligence, which we spoke through email. The big question is bubble or or
Yeah.
or humanity changing invention. Right? That's basically
Yeah.
what we've got to choose from.
We have
The
to
gold
choose
rush.
destruction of humanity or prosperity. Do we get?
Yeah.
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 Well, I'll say it's gold rush, if I can call it that.
Okay.
This is certainly the third technology gold rush I have lived through. The
Mm,
previous two being the dot-com boom, and prior to that, the PC boom. I'm old enough to recall that one.
Yeah.
Uh, there were other booms prior to that, but I'm not old enough to remember them. Um, uh, so we're in a technology gold rush. So let's at least say that.
mhm.
And the technology gold rush we're in has an unusual characteristic. Most gold rushes are set off by a new discovery or prototype that makes it apparent in a very concrete way to more than just insiders, to investors and somebody without a technical background, that in the near future we're going to see a lot of change or technical improvement or something that's likely to sell. So in the case of the internet, that was the browser. you
Mm,
know, Even a dumb CEO could see, wow, that's going to change things.
Yeah.
Yeah,
mhm,
right.
yeah.
And in the case of AI, there were two versions of that. The first one was the thing for which Hinton recently got the Nobel Prize, the neural nets that
Oh, yeah.
showed, that visual identification of millions of pictures could be done efficiently. And that's ImageNet, right? When AlexNet won ImageNet in 2012. So that was a prototype showed up that insiders recognized had extraordinary technical ability, and then slowly that started to diffuse to the valley and started to diffuse to investors who began to recognize there were lots of things that could be built on top of that, like an autonomous vehicle. Basically, that's what autonomous vehicles are doing. They're using image recognition software.
Yeah.
All right, and then adding a bit of decision software to that in order to drive a vehicle. Again, that same standard, when even a stupid CEO could see what was going on. I think everybody agrees it's November 2022 with ChatGPT
Yeah.
3.5, and ChatGPT 3.5, it's really technically on the back end not a lot different from what they were doing in 3.0. It has a few more guardrails, so it wasn't as offensive, and and it had a
Yeah.
much better interface for going back and forth. Um, and so that really grabbed a lot of attention. At the same time, on a different trajectory, and a little bit earlier, excuse me, was GitHub, the GitHub Copilot example, which was using an earlier version of ChatGPT. Um, uh, you know, I, to for your non-technical listeners, think of it as it was using ChatGPT 3.0. It was not quite using that, but let's just make it
Mhm.
easy to say that's what it was
Okay.
using. Yeah,
Okay.
and coders were able to use a version of Copilot for coding a little bit sooner, as early as late fall of 2021, and so by 2022, that's also deploying into the coding field, and so anybody with a technical background was already aware that, oh my goodness, we are about to see a major change in the efficiency of coding for any common language. Um, and so that was also happening in the background at the same
Uh-huh.
time, and that started a technical gold rush. So it was new information. A lot of people made investments in anticipation of that, and I think we're still living in the middle of that right now. We're still somewhat in a gold rush.
Do you think it makes sense to invest 500 billion that America wants to do now into AI?
The common understanding was we were in the midst of a fairly large competition for two different structures for AI going forward. One version of it is you might say democratizing AI. That's kind of the Hugging Face view of the world.
Yeah.
Everything's open source, lots and lots of programs, some small, some large. They're going to be all over the place, very nichey. Some of them niche, some of them big will grow into big things. That's one version of it, using commonly available tools like transformers. Right? That's the Hugging Face model, actually. The other alternative was large firms estimating very complicated models with billions of parameters, costing hundreds of $1,000,000 to estimate, and with the intention of making them fairly costless to use. That's not a given. That's turned out to be hard to do,
Yeah.
but that was the model, and that's the model people see in the future. Okay, so we have those two futures. Under either of those futures, NVIDIA is going to do well.
Yes.
So that's one of the reason why their stock was bid up. There's a few other companies who were going to do well under either of those futures, like ARM, another upstream chip firm. And then there were open debates about which of the downstream firms were likely to do well under those futures. Okay, so we could have that argument. Okay,
Yeah.
but that's kind of where it was. And then DeepSeek claims to have estimated a model that meets many of the same benchmarks for about a tenth of the cost or more. And that claim is being evaluated, and there seems to be at least substance to the claim. That's and so it also seems to be imitatable. At least my reading so far.
Mhm.
So you would anticipate it will be less costly to make more complex models going forward. And then an open question is, first of all, how big will those models look
Yeah.
going forward? And then will you need the same amount of input to reach the frontier as you did in the past? Arguably not.
Mm.
And then embedded in that big two different kinds of approaches to the world question, which of those gets favored? I think it's pretty clear that favors the bigger one, because the big barrier to having big expensive models is that they were big and expensive.
Mm.
Yeah, and where are we going to get $500 billion? I mean, they really were
Yeah.
talking about using almost all the available electricity by 2030. It's just the projections out to what it would take to have the big expensive models continue to grow at the same rate. It just was going to be so resource intensive. So that there's a possibility that there's a less resource intensive future is great. I mean, I think that's awesome.
I have
Yeah.
I was, both Caroline and I are filmmakers. That's our, yeah, our, our training is in that. And, I was very, very against Chat GPT. And there's actually we have an episode where I'm speaking to my cousin who's a programmer, and I'm sort of, both Caroline and I were sort of like fighting with him, like, no, this is not good. And now I use it, I search on it because it's somewhere. I mean, I don't use Google anymore. You can, toggle into search mode, and it gives a summation of what's available, and if I want to look further, I can look further given the summation. I mean, it's just, at the end of the day, it is an amazing product, and I'm not talking about ChatGPT. I'm talking about artificial intelligence as I know it to be. It's very powerful, but I guess, to your point, what will it be used for is anybody's guess.
I kind of agree with you. For at least for research, it's good at summation. I go back and forth now between a bunch of the different ones for summation. Different people have different opinions whether Claude's better or Gemini's better. Okay, fine. Whatever. I'm not going to settle that.
This is sort of maybe a reiteration of what we've been talking about, but from my perspective, it went from Deep Blue beating Gary Kasparov, and then hearing that the Go players were being beat, and then talking to my dad about chess. He likes chess, and saying that not only are they winning, they're winning in ways that no human being would conceive of.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
so then all of a sudden, Chat GPT came. So there's a gap there of about 4 years for me. And then Sam Altman comes out and says that we are going to allow the first one-person billion-dollar valuation company. And do you feel, even though you may not be able to put your finger on it, do you believe there's that kind of power in what we're creating to empower individuals to do things that only corporations with, many employees and a really talented CEO were able to do?
That's a great question.
Mm.
And just to be provocative, I'm going to say no. Uh, okay. And I'm not sure I'm fully behind no, but I'm gonna give the no answer.
Okay.
Okay.
Just to be provocative. Um, and I'm happy to hear your pushback. So the example you didn't raise is Watson. So let's raise Watson.
Okay.
Watson was the IBM system that beat Jeopardy, the Jeopardy champions.
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah. And what happened to them? So absolutely stunning prototype, right? Not unlike the other, Watson also beat Gary Kasparov, but also like the Go players, and there's a couple other prototypes that have, with, reinforcement learning, learned to play these games. And Jeopardy did that. The Watson learned to do that with Jeopardy. Now, it turned out, if you look carefully at what Watson was doing, it had all this information at its call, and then they had to tweak it in order to play Jeopardy. To answer to buzz in, if you will, of and phrase everything as a question. What was really going on behind the surface was it was making estimates of the probability that some answer met the clue, and so the team that made that thought or believed that same kind of question answering system would be valuable in healthcare, and so IBM spent quite a bit of money, to the tune of ultimately $5 billion, to develop a series of question answer tools that were valuable inside medicine. They bought up a lot of data, and they put in a bunch of lot of effort and time and effort into the interface. And at the end of the day, it did not generate $5 billion of revenue. And why not? Well, among the things that it just couldn't do was integrate with the flow of a medical system. A doctor could recall pretty much 90-something% of the things Watson was producing, and so didn't go to Watson most of the time. In the settings where it needed it, the doctor would have to break with the patient to go to Watson to look up something. Didn't want to do that, so they were going to do it later, if they were going to do it at all. And then when the answer came up, it would be a series of answers, and the doctors often couldn't back out why Watson came to the answer or suggestion it came to. And if you know doctors, they wanted to know why the
Right.
diagnosis came out. And so Watson, at some level, was fantastic. I mean, it was amazing. And yet, it didn't integrate well into human activity. And the lesson you get from that is that a lot of AI is amazing as a prototype. Absolutely. But it's going to take quite a lot of investment to integrate it into human processes and human businesses as they exist today. We could talk about X-rays is another one, automated X-ray identification of disease inside X-ray. The prototypes are stunning. They're better than humans, no question about it. Integrating that into the healthcare system is where the challenges are, we've been living with this for a decade, and we're still not quite there, and we still have another decade to go.
That definitely goes along with your gold rush analogy that you've been saying from the beginning of this conversation, which is somebody's going to have to drill into the side of the mountain. You just can't pan in the creek forever. at some
True.
point.
Yeah.
True.
And don't get me wrong, one of my students is going to do it, or one of your friends is going to do it, and that's great. There's someone it will figure something out. That's just awesome, but might take a while.
It might take a while. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll let you get to your seminar, and
yeah. Thank you. It was
thank
a
you.
pleasure talking to you. Yeah.
It was great talking to
Too.
you.
It was wonderful.
Wonderful.
Thank you for watching or listening to The Internet is Crack. Tune in next week when we have another great conversation about robotics, AI, and the internet. You can watch us or listen to us on YouTube or Spotify or many other outlets. And don't forget to follow us on social media. See you next Monday.